On June 17th of the year 2000, the CMLL and AAA worked together in an event called Padrisimo. This event is remembered as something that seemed impossible. The two biggest companies of Lucha Libre in Mexico facing each other with their best elements. But to understand the importance of Padrisimo, we have to know the history of both companies. Today in Let's Talk Lucha, we'll take a look at the history of the CMLL and AAA and the day they collided. Salvador Lutteroth González was born in 1897, and as a young boy, he joined the Mexican Revolution, which started in 1910. He would end up serving as a lieutenant and captain under the command of Álvaro Obregón, which means he fought against the dictatorship of Porfirio Díaz, and he was on the same side as Pancho Villa, a historical figure you might have heard of. In 1924, he started working in the tax department in Mexico City, and 5 years later, in 1929, he was sent to Ciudad Juárez as part of the job. Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua is one of the busiest and most popular border cities between Mexico and the United States. And back then, crossing it wasn't as difficult as nowadays. So one day, Salvador crossed the border to El Paso, Texas, and he went to a wrestling show. He was left in awe, and as many of us have experienced, he wanted everyone to see it. Salvador went back to Mexico City, and 4 years later, in 1933, alongside his business partner Francisco Ahumada, he founded the Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre, the Mexican company of Lucha Libre. This was the first promotion of Lucha Libre in Mexico. The first show of this company took place on September 21st, 1933, and this day is known as the birth of Lucha Libre, with Salvador Lutteroth being known in Mexico as the father of Lucha Libre. This first show took place in a familiar place that back then was called Arena Modelo, a venue that before that was mainly used for boxing matches. But it had been neglected until Lutteroth started using it for Lucha Libre. In that first show, there was a particular wrestler that would be fundamental in the history of Lucha Libre, having an impact no one could have imagined. Corbin James Macy was one of the wrestlers Salvador saw in El Paso, Texas, and he was also present in the first show of the EMLL, wrestling then as Ciclón Mackey. 1 year later, he would become the first masked luchador in Mexico, appearing then as La Maravilla Enmascarada, the Masked Marvel, and this happened at EMLL's first anniversary show. He and others had used masks in the US before, but this hadn't been seen in Mexico. This would inspire Lutteroth to create other masked luchadores, and also this dynamic of good versus evil, which has been present in Lucha Libre ever since with the Rudos and Técnicos. Business was booming, and Salvador built his own venue for Lucha Libre, the Arena Coliseo, which still to this day is owned by the company, and hosts Lucha Libre shows every week. Arena Modelo was then used as a school of Lucha Libre, but when the Arena Coliseo became too small for the crowds that wanted to see Lucha Libre, he commissioned the renovation of the Arena Modelo. In 1956, the biggest venue for Lucha Libre in Mexico was finished, and it was renamed as the Arena Mexico. Arena Mexico is now known as the Cathedral or the Mecca of Lucha Libre. For every Lucha Libre fan, it's a dream to attend a show in that venue, and for many luchadores, it's a step in their career that lets them know that they've made it to the big leagues. Almost every lucha legend you can think of has wrestled in Arena Mexico: El Santo, Blue Demon, Mil Máscaras, Los Villanos, Los Brazos, Místico, Volador Jr., and many more. At the end of the 60s, Salvador left the company in the hands of his son, Salvador Lutteroth Camus, who I will call Salvador Jr. He made some changes to the company that led to poor earnings and less money for the company, which of course is not good for the luchadores. This led some luchadores and promoters like Francisco Flores, Benjamin Mora Jr., and Rey Mendoza, the father of Los Villanos, to create their own promotion in 1975, the Universal Wrestling Association. They operated mainly from the Toreo de Cuatro Caminos, another legendary venue that saw a parade of national and international stars such as Andre the Giant, Hulk Hogan, Canek, Mil Máscaras, and more. This company didn't hold luchadores to restrictive contracts, so those who worked for the company were often referred to as the Independientes, the independents. This could be considered the first desbandada or runoff of many that would be seen in Lucha Libre. And the UWA could be considered the first rival of the EMLL. In the 80s, after an alliance with the NWA that didn't amount to too much because the company lost the reign to the World Wrestling Federation, Paco Alonso, the nephew of Salvador Jr., Antonio Peña, and promoter Carlos Elizondo came up with the idea of repackaging the EMLL as the Consejo Mundial de Lucha Libre, the CMLL. It was at the end of the 80s as well that Salvador Jr. retired and he left the company in the hands of his nephew, Paco Alonso. At the start of the 90s, the CMLL was broadcast through Televisa, which is the biggest audiovisual content producer company for the Hispanic market. This again led to the CMLL doing better business, now having access to every home in Mexico. But just 2 years later, fed by the lack of opportunities, Booker Antonio Peña left the CMLL alongside other big stars like Conan and Octagon, and they created Asistencia, Asesoría y Administración, the AAA. One interesting fact is that Televisa was part owner and the main investor of this new company. This is definitely the most famous and impactful desbandada in Lucha Libre history, leaving CMLL without many of its main stars like Blue Panther, El Perro Aguayo, The Dinamitas, and bringing future stars like Rey Mysterio Jr. and Psicosis. The creation of AAA also led to the death of the UWA, ending its rivalry with the CMLL, but leaving us with the biggest feud this sport has ever seen: CMLL versus AAA. The investment that was made in AAA was huge, but during the mid-90s there was a big recession in the country, which of course meant that the business went down. The CMLL retreated to its own arenas and focused on forging new talent. But AAA didn't own any arenas and relied on touring the country. This was expensive and saw poor revenue. This would cause their own desbandada when Conan took many of the main event stars with him to the United States. Of course, you know many of these luchadores because you saw them in WCW: Rey Mysterio, Psicosis, La Parca, Hector Garza, and many more. This resulted in Antonio Peña betting everything to the talent that stayed with him, such as Latin Lover, Cibernético, A New Parca, and more. Because of the recession, Televisa liquidated his share in AAA, and Antonio Peña founded his own company, Promociones Antonio Peña, but he kept the name of AAA. Another interesting fact is that in 1997, AAA had a short alliance with the WWF, which allowed AAA's talent to appear in that year's Royal Rumble. In the year 2000, both companies were broadcast through Televisa, and the suits of the company knew they could get something big if they faced both promotions. Of course, this was not something that the owners of either promotion would do of their own accord. AAA had been created by people who had left the CMLL feeling underutilized and undervalued. But after 8 years of existence, many luchadores had come and gone between both promotions. Still, the reason why the event would happen was that Televisa told Paco Alonso and Antonio Peña to figure it out and make it happen. And of course, they didn't take a no for an answer. The joint event was called Padrisimo, which means super cool, and it's a wordplay with padre, which can mean either father or cool. And this was because the event would take place on Father's Day on June 17, 2000. But before we go to the event, I have to mention something that happened before that day to create excitement for the show. It was clear that neither company wanted to devote much time to their rival in their programming, so the build-up was not what one could expect, except for the iconic day that AAA invaded Arena Mexico. By the time Padrisimo was about to happen, the CMLL had gained the reputation of being the serious Lucha Libre promotion. It prided itself on having the best luchadores, and they called AAA's product a cheap show and its elements clowns. That's part of the reason why the CMLL is called La Seria y Estable, the serious and stable company. No matter what show you went to, CMLL guaranteed you would see real Lucha Libre with chain wrestling and the sport being taken seriously. Not a pyrotechnic circus with parody characters and luchadores going through the crowd hitting each other with chairs and other things. AAA, on the other hand, prided itself in giving you a memorable spectacle. What you would get would be similar to going to a high-production concert, and they guaranteed you would be entertained by their colorful characters and high-flying acrobats. Still to this day, this is what each company accuses the other of doing. But days before Padrisimo took place, Antonio Peña told the members of Los Vipers to meet him at the parking lot of the Arena Mexico. There, he gave Cibernético, Abismo Negro, Histeria, El Mosco de la Merced, The Second Psicosis, Maniaco, and Electroshock tickets to enter the show, and he told them to attack the CMLL elements in the middle of the second to last match. But how did they get in without being noticed? Well, they bought máscaras outside the arena. Masks from the same luchadores they would later attack. That's why when suddenly CMLL luchadores appear in the ring attacking both rudos and técnicos, fans didn't understand what was happening. And when the same luchadores came from backstage to the ring, people couldn't understand what was going on. You had two felinos and two fuerza guerreras in the ring, and they were attacking each other. But once the masks were taken off, everything made sense but was still hard to believe. The ring and the area around it were mayhem. You could barely make sense of what was happening. At one point, Abismo Negro tried to light the CMLL luchadores on fire while he and the other Vipers were pushed to the exit of the arena. The police had to interfere, but they couldn't stop either side from fighting outside the arena. The Técnicos and Rudos of the CMLL had united to defend their home, and given that they were double in number, they succeeded. This night is considered by Lucha fans as one of the greatest moments in Lucha Libre history, one they never thought could happen. But it didn't just happen once. Maniaco and Hysteria recently said that they repeated the stunt in other arenas owned by the CMLL, always resulting in both sides not pulling punches to defend the honor of the company they represented. That's how we get to Padrisimo on June 17 in the year 2000 at the Plaza de Toros, Mexico, which is the biggest bull ring in the world, often used for concerts and where AAA celebrated the first Triple Mania in 1993. This venue was able to hold 42,000 people, and some sources say 30,000 people attended the show. But if you watch the videos of the event, it seems like maybe half of it was empty. Another interesting aspect is that the event took place at noon, having a few musical numbers before the Lucha show began. The idea was for people to attend the show and afterwards go home and celebrate the fathers. It might seem weird, but there were only 4 matches that day. And this might be another sign that neither company wanted to take part of this event, but they had to do it unwillingly. The first match had El Cobarde, Tejano Sr., and Sangre Chicana, the father of La Hiedra, who now works in AAA, and Lluvia, who now works in the CMLL. They were the Rudos and represented AAA. They faced El Olímpico, Mr. Niebla, and Emilio Charles Jr. from the CMLL. Also in each match there were AAA and CMLL referees. And even the commentators were split, with Dr. Alfonso Morales taking the side of the CMLL and Arturo Rivera defending AAA's honor. The first match would be the only actual match in which we saw the CMLL against AAA. And this was because the rest of the matches combined Técnicos and Rudos from both companies. In the beginning of this first match, the Rudos from AAA took control outside and inside the ring, but it didn't take long for the elements of the CMLL to fight back and also take the action to the outside of the ring. Then, the action stayed mainly in the ring, and just 5 minutes into the match, El Cobarde was submitted and then El Tejano. The CMLL had won the first match cleanly. Sangre Chicana started arguing with his teammates, and they ended up turning on him. This took the spotlight from the winners, and it ended up being more interesting than the match itself. In the second match, the roles were turned, and the Rudos were the luchadores from the CMLL. They were the Infernales, which back then included El Satánico, Rey Bucanero, and Último Guerrero. They went up against Latin Lover and Hector Garza from AAA and Tarzan Boy from the CMLL. Here I would like to add a couple of things. The Vipers who made the attack on the CMLL days prior were scheduled to face the Infernales, which would have been a more interesting match. But El Picudo, the leader of Los Vatos Locos and relative to Antonio Peña, complained about including the Vipers and not his faction. And Peña decided not to include either team in the end. But Electroshock, Cibernético, and Abismo Negro did get included in other matches. Also, Latin Lover has said that prior to the event, Peña and Paco Alonso were booking the match and they couldn't decide on who would be the captain of the Técnicos. Alonso wanted Tarzan Boy as the captain because he was a new start he wanted to push, and Peña wanted Latin Lover because he was the one with more experience. In the end, Hector Garza was chosen as the captain because he had been in the CMLL recently. The Infernales, being used to teaming up, took the advantage, and they took control of the Técnicos. Meanwhile, the Rudo Rivera complained about this match being a handicap match of 4 versus 2, because Tarzan Boy was also part of the CMLL, something to which El Dr. Alfonso Morales couldn't respond with one of his clever comebacks. By the 5-minute mark, Latin Lover put a stop to the Infernales and pinned Rey Bucanero. This was the first sign of another short match, since all of the matches in the event were only 1 fall matches. After Tarzan Boy faced Último Guerrero and did a beautiful tornillo to the outside, the captains El Satánico and Hector Garza tried their best to win the match for their teams. At one point, El Satánico pinned Garza while holding the first rope, and the CMLL referee counted to 3. But the AAA referee saw it and restarted the match. Garza didn't lose time and set up El Satánico on the canvas and went to the third rope in the corner. He then executed the most beautiful tornillo in Lucha Libre, this time to the inside of the ring, which wasn't common. He hit his target and won the match via pinfall. I would say that even though Tarzan Boy was on the team, AAA won the second match because all the Rudos were part of the CMLL. And although it had a great ending, this match lasted less than 9 minutes. The next match saw Electroshock and Pirata Morgan from AAA, alongside Bestia Salvaje from the CMLL as the Rudos. And they had a whole family as their opponents. Let me explain this because it was a very touching moment and fitting for the event. As the Técnicos, you had El Felino and El Negro Casas from the CMLL, and Heavy Metal from AAA. And they were all brothers, part of the Casas dynasty. Their father, Pepe Casas, had been a luchador, a very famous referee, and that day at Padrisimo, celebrating Father's Day, he was the referee for the match. I can only imagine how proud and happy he must have felt sharing the ring with his 3 sons. Something that at that moment wouldn't have been possible any other way because he and Heavy Metal were part of AAA. This match was more fast-paced and had better spots than the other two. The Rudos were tough, but the Casas brothers were fast and experienced, giving the best spots of the match. Everything was going great for the Técnicos until El Negro Casas applied a casita to Pirata Morgan, and when Pepe was about to count to 3, El Tirantes, the other referee who was Rudo, stopped him. Then they started fighting in the middle of the ring until the luchadores stopped them, and a third referee was called to the ring. Once the action resumed, the Técnicos quickly took charge, and paying homage to their father, each one applied la casita at the same time, a move that was invented by Pepe Casas. This match lasted 11 minutes, and the highlight definitely was seeing Pepe Casas shedding some tears at the end of the match, when his 3 children hugged him while still in the ring. The main event of Padrisimo was the only match that had 2 teams of 4 luchadores. On the side of the Técnicos, we had Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Brazo de Plata, also known as Super Porky from the CMLL, and the second Parca and Octagon from AAA. The Rudos included Shocker and Pierrot from the CMLL, and Cibernético and Abismo Negro from AAA. Just before the match started, Shocker and Pierrot took the mic to say that one of them should be the captain of the team and not Cibernético. Then Cibernético and Abismo Negro responded, saying that their boss had chosen Cibernético as the captain. This of course let us know that the Rudos wouldn't be united against the Técnicos. I would say this was probably the most entertaining match, with most spots consistent of the charismatic Técnicos doing their signature moves and the Rudos fighting each other to take control of the match. In the end, Super Porky won the match for the Técnicos by flying from the 3rd rope and falling on top of Shocker and Cibernético. The referee counted to 3 and the match was over in less than 8 minutes. What came next was that the bull ring became a branch of hell. Once the match ended, the Rudos still in the ring started fighting each other. But then more luchadores from both companies started coming out. It finally happened. The CMLL luchadores were fighting the AAA luchadores. It didn't matter if they were Técnicos or Rudos. Now they were defending the honor of their companies. Stiff shots were thrown, luchadores stopped selling, and for 8 minutes you could tell many of the luchadores were fighting, not wrestling. Security was running around trying to stop the fights, but once one ended, another 2 were starting. At one point, a CMLL element took Abismo Negro's mask, and later on you could see both fighting while the other luchadores gave them space and told each other to not interfere. This was true mayhem and the best part of the whole event, what you would have been expecting since the beginning. Padrisimo had less than 40 minutes of actual matches. You could tell the owners of both companies played it safe with the booking, and no luchador wanted to put their rival company over. This event had potential, but it's clear it wasn't what it could have been because it was done unwillingly. Still, it left us with legendary moments like the AAA invasion of the Arena Mexico, the reunion of the Casas, and the final brawl, which left you wondering if they really hated each other. More than 20 years later, this hasn't happened again. The CMLL and AAA are still rivals, and nowadays the CMLL is backed up by AEW, while AAA is owned by WWE. Still to this day, each company has its hardcore fans who still use the same arguments as back then. The CMLL fans call AAA a circus and its luchadores clowns. But when those luchadores go to the CMLL, they are recognized as great elements. AAA fans called CMLL boring and repetitive, but when there are rumors of a star from the Consejo going to AAA, they go crazy about it. Could we ever get to see another event like Padrisimo? It seems unlikely. But the truth is that the CMLL and AAA are competitors because they are the biggest Lucha Libre companies in the country. They have given us huge international stars, and any sensible fan will recognize there's value in both existing. Personally, I want to see both companies succeed and I enjoy watching both. Truly, my biggest fear is that one of them disappears. But even if that happens, one thing will remain. CMLL versus AAA will always remain the biggest rivalry in Lucha Libre history. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy learning more about these companies. Let me know in the comments which company you like best. Remember, you can now become a member of the channel to support these videos. And you can also join my newsletter to read my takes on what's happening in the world of Lucha Libre. I'm Eric, your source of Lucha Libre lore, and I will see you in the next video.